Started 7:01. We might get one more person. No, just come on up when it's time. Yeah, you can just come up when it's time. Okay. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt owed to this indigenous people, the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits
Recording in progress.
to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe, and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
I'm going to go ahead and do the roll call. Member Bierce? Here. Member Hodges?
Here.
Member Larson?
Here.
Member Lieberman is absent and Member Melgen is absent. Member Rose Shears?
Here.
And Chair Vahil McClanahan.
Here. All right, my apologies. We did the land acknowledgement first this time. So now we're going right along to the approval of the minutes from April.
Any questions on the minutes?
And is there any public comment on the minutes? All right. I move that we approve the April minutes.
Second?
Okay. Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
And Chair Vahil McClanahan.
Yes. All right, now it is time for public comment, and we have a commenter in the room. That's so exciting.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm here to make an announcement. So the Albany Climate Action Coalition is sponsoring a talk this Sunday from 3 to 4:45 on native plants and the urban environment, and also a special section on Albany Hill. And Catherine is going to talk about native plants and tree planting in Albany. And also I have a request, and that is that we really look seriously at doing a Community Resilience Center at the Albany Community Center, combined with the library, because I think there is a really excellent opportunity to get funding for this. And I've been talking with them about how to get us into this program, and I believe we're going to need the city to be behind it as well. So just is something that I think the city has needed for over 30 years. I've been here for 35 years, and nothing's ever happened. So I think it's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any online commenters?
If you're on Zoom and you'd like to make general public comment, please raise your hand.
Cindy Young, go ahead.
Hello, yes, this is Lucinda. I'm sorry, I just entered the meeting. Is this the good of the city or?
Yeah, the
Public
general
comment period?
public comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief announcement about the upcoming East Bay Green Home Tour, which will be on June 7th from 12 to 4, and there will be at least one Albany home on that home tour, as well as several homes in nearby Berkeley and El Cerrito. These homes are either fully or almost fully electrified, as well as having various other green home features. And as the committee may know from past the green home tours, this is sponsored by the City of Berkeley, and this year by the nonprofit Actera. And it's free to the public. People need to register, and you get an opportunity to go in and get ideas on, tour the home and get some ideas on how to make your home more sustainable. And I came in late. Did a speaker announce about the Albany Climate Action Coalition?
Yes.
I'm assuming that, yes, there was an announcement made about the library presentation
Yes, there
on
was.
May 25th. Thank you.
No other public comment?
All right, thank you, commenters. We're going to move to, oh, okay. We have 4 presentations on here, but we don't have anything listed under presentations. So we're going to go ahead to item 5.1, which is climate action in the city budget.
Yes. Yeah, our presentations can fall into either category. So, okay, great. I'm just going to give a short presentation. We also have Jeff Bond, our Community Development Director, here today, so he can help answer any questions that get more technical than maybe I'm capable of. So I'll start off with just some background. So right now, we are towards the end of the biennial budget planning process. This presentation is just kind of providing some background about the way that climate action is showing up in the planned budget. Every 2 years, the City Council adopts a biennial or 2-year budget. That was discussed just a couple days ago at the May 19th City Council meeting, and they're expected to adopt it at probably the first of their June meetings, and then it'll go into effect at the start of the fiscal year in July. So the budget that was presented to the City Council, I won't bore you with all of the very many details that are in there, but one of the big notes about this budget is that it's actually a balanced budget for the first time in many, many years. There was a lot of work that went into that process, as you can imagine, and while not all departments took cuts relative to their previous year's budget, all departments were kind of forced to squeeze in various ways, and try to do more with less and cut out the fat and all those sorts of things. So there's a lot of work that went into balancing the budget. And it was a very thoughtful process, as you can all imagine. And then one other kind of main thing about the budget making process is that it's really built around the core public services that we provide as a city. So, things like fire and police and maintaining roads and all those kinds of things that cities do. And then also the council strategic plan, which they finished earlier this year. That's a 2-year strategic plan. And 2 of the goals are particularly relevant to climate action, those strategic plan goals. Number 1, reduce greenhouse gas pollution and adapt to climate change. And number 3, promote streets that support safety, transportation, and mobility options. So that was sort of at the heart of the budget planning process. Why is that? There we go. Okay, sorry. There we go. Another piece of background is on Measure DD. I think most of us have, talked through this several times before, but just to review again about Measure DD, this is a utility users tax increase that was passed in 2020, and it's a general tax rather than a special tax. So all of that revenue goes to the general fund and can be spent on any number of things in the general fund. It's just kind of general revenue. However, it did include a provision in the text of the measure encouraging the council to spend 1/3 of that revenue on climate action. So that's something that is within the budget in a variety of ways. But again, it's part of the general fund. So it's not kind of separated out as a special tax like Measure D, which is our waste funding. It's not quite like that. And the estimated revenue from Measure DD for the upcoming fiscal year is $318,000. That's the 1/3 section rather than the full revenue. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag there. So in terms of the ways that climate action shows up specifically in the budget, the main place is within the community development department budget. Obviously, all of our departments are doing various types of climate action work, but most of it is housed within the community development department, which is why you talk to community development staff so often, actually, as you can imagine. And a pretty large percentage of the department budget itself is really related to climate action one way or another, and in particular staffing. That's 70% of our department's budget, and that includes staffing for all of my time, for Benji's time, for a lot of the other folks in our department who work on these things, transportation, for example. And that covers all of our existing projects that you know about, things like the gas line decommissioning pilot, the sustainable foodware ordinance implementation, building out our active transportation plan, a whole variety of things. It also, very excitingly, includes $10,000 for an electric vehicle for our building inspector. That hasn't been purchased yet since it's in the planned budget, but we do expect that to happen sometime soon after the budget is passed. And then also it includes funding for the heat pump rebate program. It's approximately $60,000. I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next item. It's not exactly like a line item specific in the budget, but it's sort of planned to be about that much funding. And this graph is just a handy chart of the anticipated expenditures for a variety of climate projects. I won't go over all of it in detail since it was in the memo, but it gives you a sense of all the different kinds of things we're working on. And then, of course, there's lots of smaller general climate-related items that pop up here and there that kind of just ends up in overall staffing budget. And then the other big place where we see a lot of climate action work being funded is in the Public Works Department budget. Obviously, the Public Works Department is doing a lot of things related to maintenance, rehabilitation, and capital improvement projects that are related to climate in one way or another. A lot of them are transportation focused in particular, and then also some of our city buildings. So things like streetlight upgrades or fixing sidewalks, some smaller building upgrades, like recently they installed heat pump water heaters in a couple of buildings. And also I learned that very, very recently, I think in the last couple of weeks, the Public Works Department installed an EV charger in the Public Works building. So very exciting about that too. The Public Works building is down on, I think, Cleveland Avenue near the highway. So their department budget covers a lot of that kind of ongoing work that, makes it easier to do active transportation in the city, electrifies our buildings, et cetera. And then there's also larger plan projects that are funded through the Capital Improvement Plan, the CIP. That's a 5-year plan it's separate from the overall budget, although they're closely connected. And that's also nearing completion at the moment. They're expecting to take that to council in July. But that includes a lot of the sort of larger scale projects, things like, putting in bike lanes and, larger pedestrian upgrades, thinking about larger scale building electrification projects, and also building upgrades overall. That all kind of goes into the CIP process. And for instance, we've been talking about EV charging in different facilities, in different city facilities. That's something that's being thought about as part of the CIP process. So that kind of fits into there. So that said, climate is kind of throughout the city budget, but really especially in those two department budgets, both in staffing and then also in particular programs and projects. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And as I mentioned, Jeff is also here to answer any questions.
I have a few questions. First of all, great to see this detail, super helpful, of the transparency, so thank you for compiling this information. It looks like $318,000 is the amount for a third of new Measure D revenue for this upcoming fiscal year. And I'm seeing that the department budget is 60K for the program, which, is that for the heat pump HVAC rebate program? Is that just general funding? Like, how is that 60K?
Yeah, the 60K is what we're planning to spend on the heat pump rebate program based on the current budget. Yeah.
Couple more questions is, it sounds like we have roughly $318,000 in the budget. There's potentially opportunity to spend more of that budget on other programs that we have on the agenda today, like the heat pump rebates or other things. So what's stopping us from using the funding? Is there anything that's in the way of that? Or like, talk about the process for how those funds get deployed?
I might let Jeff start on that one, kind of walk through how that process works.
So good evening, Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. I'm glad to be here. So if I understand your question, it's how does the 60,000 going to heat pump program, what happens to the remaining 200 and, sorry, I'm trying to do the math in my head. I won't try to do that. So it's tricky because it's in the general fund bucket. So what we will be doing and what we have done and will continue to do is, as climate action related projects are undertaken, it goes through the general fund, it will go through this budget that the council's about to adopt, but we'll track it so that we also know that it meets the criteria of Measure DD. We'll probably end up spending more, depending on what everyone thinks counts in Measure DD or not. We could end up spending a lot more than the $381,000 if you include, for example, staff time. When we think about it, we're not really counting salaries, but certainly Michelle, a very large majority of her time is dedicated to this. If we started to count that in, that could count towards the dollar amount, maybe a small percentage of my time. But that would be when we go to council with individual programs that, let's say we want to restart the multifamily EV charger program again. We would go back to council and get their approval to do that, and we could say, okay, we're going to use the community development department budget, and that also will count towards Measure DD, the utilization of the 1/3 of Measure DD that was expressed in the ballot measure. So, I'm sorry, it's a confusing
Yeah, it sounds
answer.
like it's based on what counts as Measure DD related funds and then council approval of those.
That's right,
Okay.
yes. Thank you. That was a much clearer answer than I had. I'll just stay up here in case there are other questions.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I have a question about the money allocated for the gas line decommissioning project. If we don't have to spend that and the feds come through, what and when will be the process for potentially reallocating that money?
So that money is currently in the Climate Action Reserve Fund.
Right.
And in theory, at any point, that money is appropriated. It hasn't been spent. And so in theory, at any point in time, we or the committee or whoever could request that the council basically reappropriate those funds to something else. And the council could do that at any point in time. I think it really kind of comes down to a discussion of, do we feel secure with our grant funding? Do we want to keep that money reserved for this project? What's the sort of balance between the different programs that we're considering? But yeah, I mean, it's sort of sitting there waiting to be used in case right now, but it could be unappropriated and reappropriated to something else.
And that's project costs that will be invoiced like over this calendar year and next calendar year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would say our confidence level is very, very cautious.
Yeah,
right?
no, understood.
Yes.
So just to kind of recap, just to make sure I understand this correctly, is that in order to use Measure DD funds, you have to make sure that it aligns to the definition of what counts as Measure DD funds, like related to climate, and then get council approval on that. So if we wanted to increase budgets for some other thing, like that we talked about today, it has to go through that process. It sounds like that's the way you spend it. Anything I'm missing about that, or it has to be just at the CAC meeting first, or like any other process?
So if you stay within our overall budget for the department, which is, sorry, I had it open. We have an overall, most of the Measure DD money that we're going to spend on programs is going to be part of what, kind of put it in a pool of professional services. Our department's going to, in the proposed budget, has a budget of $705,000 for professional services. And that covers a lot of different things. That covers transportation, so the active transportation plan. It covers the street tree management plan. It covers some of our planning and building responsibilities. So there's a lot of other things going through that. But basically, if we can stay within that $705,000, we will get that appropriation. We don't have to go back to council for approval of the budget. We will need to go back to council for approval of the program concept, whether they like the concept or not, and in most cases, approval of a budget, a contract. So if we're contracting somebody to do it for us, which in most cases is what we do. Some cases, maybe not. You know, some of the programs that Michelle has just through sheer determination gotten done on her own, and with Benji's help. But her capacity, is significant as it is going to be a little bit more challenged with the gas line project getting a stride here pretty soon. So, and again, just to kind of summarize, it's not necessarily a budget action that we're anticipating would be required, but a program approval and a contract approval. At least a program approval and possibly a contract approval.
The electric vehicle for the city inspector, was that, how was that decision made? Was that a result of the EV first kind of fleet turnover initiative, or was that some separate, different decision?
It was just a decision of the administrative team that we've heard everyone talk about this for a long time, and we want to, this would actually be a lease, incidentally, not a purchase.
I saw, yeah.
For $10,000, I wish we could get one.
Makes more sense with the 10,000, yeah.
It's not going to be a fancy EV. Don't look for a Tesla or anything. But yeah, right now we have a hand-me-down Chevy Tahoe from the fire department, which is not at all an ecologically oriented vehicle, other than it exists in our fleet and nobody else is using it. So at least we're using the embedded carbon in it. That was a decision that the management team made to begin to respond to the comments that we've heard over and over again.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, absolutely. That's fleet turnover just because it's the right direction to go. That's awesome. Yeah. I was just curious about the fleet turnover. Is that the first electric vehicle in the city fleet?
I believe the GEM, which is like a parking enforcement vehicle, is electric. That's like a really small one.
I think
that's it.
I'm not sure of all the rec department vehicles. Maybe they have something. I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think this would be the first vehicle.
And I believe the fire department's also looking at an electric vehicle for their inspection staff as well.
Does the city PR department know about that?
I'm sure they will. We might wait until it's, done before announcing things like that.
Well, thanks. That's great news. And then the charging station, was that part of the city direction, or was that also just a planned project to support this EV or something?
I think it's similar as something that's, we've been talking about it a lot for a long time. Like I said, as part of the CIP project or CIP planning process, the Public Works Department is thinking about larger scale charging, but it was something that was able to be done kind of on a smaller budget and smaller time scale. And basically they felt that they could kind of do it separately, so.
It's great. I'm super happy to hear that that
Yeah.
it's incorporating into the city thinking. So that's really good news.
Yeah.
And just like kudos to Eric for spearheading that, when was that, about a year ago or so? When you brought that as a recommendation, and then city council did approve it. And yeah, I think that's the part that we're in a black box about, is like, okay, we proposed that they do this. It's now happening. Is that a straight line? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think
Kudos.
sometimes these things go through a bit of a maze, but
Yeah.
they filter their way through. Yeah.
But that's great. That's a progress to celebrate.
Any other questions? Yes.
I was curious if the Tri-Transit program would be included in the active transportation part of the budget, or is that like something completely different?
Yeah, so that would be a good example. Jeff was mentioning before about how if you're able to kind of keep the budget within our department budget, we could get approval for the concept. So that's something where we could get approval for the concept, but, it's like $1,000 pilot program, so we could easily find that within the existing city budget. It's not part of the active transportation plan process, although, I'm not really involved in that. Maybe something like that could come up, but that's more focused on walking and biking, so a little bit different from transit.
Related to the active transportation plan, it sounds like the physical work that will come of the planning is all baked into the capital improvement plan that they're bringing to council soon. But of course, that plan is not done. So how will they take like the directional current version of the plan?
So every project that they do, our department collaborates with Public Works on every one of their roadway projects.
Right.
And so when we see those opportunities, we do them now. I think that once what will change with the active transportation plan is if the network that we ultimately select changes when we, maybe a bicycle facility will go down a particular street that hasn't been discussed in the past. We'll incorporate that into the next sewer replacement project or this next repaving of that street. So what I think you will see over the next 10 years or so is that we'll refer back to the active transportation plan with every new project. Like, okay, now this type of facility is expected on this particular roadway. It's going to be designed that way. I don't expect that you'll see just one big project in the capital improvement plan that says active transportation. It's more embedded in each individual project as we grind through our obligations to replace sewer lines and repair our deteriorating roads, and as East Bay Mud and PG&E come in and do the same thing. It's all kind of a dance between three different agencies.
That's
With
really
the surface of the roadway being the last thing, this is the active transportation.
Thank you. That clarifies it a lot. So like their capital improvement plan is maintenance that's needed, and then while they're maintaining it, they get direction from community development. Thank you.
I had one question on one item that was listed as a TBD, the 2025 California Green Building Code implementation. Seemed like a potential strong lever for some of the home electrification stuff, so I was just curious, I guess at the city level, what would that potentially entail for like Albany's implementation?
Yeah, so, we have a green building ordinance in place right now that we'll need to update as the new building codes are adopted. That's something that it's still kind of going through the process of legislation and finishing the new codes and everything. So I haven't started delving into it yet. depending on kind of what direction we choose to go with that process, it could be more or less involved. But, chances are that the budgeting for that is mainly just staff time of both developing whatever green building ordinance, if we choose to do that, and then basically enforcing that on a project by project level.
If I can add a little bit to that, so our building codes in California are updated every 3 years. We went through a process, it's either 3 or 6 years ago, it blurs now a little bit, of adopting some more stringent green building standards than the minimums required by the state. We, at that time, had the benefit of a outside consultant funded by Ava, I believe it was, who did the technical studies that we're required to do to make the case for this more stringent requirements. Hopefully, we will find somebody to provide that technical support, but possibly no, in which case that might be a project that we would want to take on with the adoption of the new codes later this year, as time permits. But we'll learn more about that. The codes kind of hit the streets in July, and then there tends to be a lot of seminars and a lot of attention paid to it in fall, and I think that's when we'll start making those kinds of decisions about what we want to do in terms of more stringent standards.
It would be great to hear an update in fall if possible.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely be bringing discussions about that to the committee when the time comes.
Any other questions? All right, we'll move to public comment.
We can start with any commenters in the room. If anyone, are there any participants in the room that would like to comment? No? Okay. Anyone online?
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle, for the update. Really great to hear that the city is leasing an EV for the building inspector. I will say that Albany Climate Action members have appeared at numerous city council meetings and have sent numerous emails to city council urging them to move towards electrification. And Michelle, you had mentioned that you thought we had a parking enforcement vehicle that was electric, and there was a big issue about a year ago when the city council approved the purchase of another gas enforcement vehicle based on a report from the police staff that there were, quote, mechanical problems with the gas version. So I'm just wondering if, did the city ultimately purchase an electric parking enforcement vehicle? Because we never really heard what ultimately happened. We expressed concerns and complaints to city council, and some reports that the electric version was, there were not substantial mechanical problems. So I was curious to hear, Michelle said that she thought there was an electric parking enforcement vehicle. Also, great to hear that the EV charger got installed. I'm assuming it's a level 2. And I know that had been cited, the lack of EV chargers had been cited as a reason for not going forward with a parking enforcement vehicle. And just had a question. I know we were talking about the green building code. I don't want to get too off base, but it seems like it was about 2 years ago, the city, and I remember it went through the CAC, and we passed an ordinance that required all electric in new construction and substantial, where there's a substantial remodel. And then based on the Berkeley lawsuit, My understanding is that the city just decided on its, not to enforce that, but I'm wondering if there was any formal analysis and decision not to enforce that, because I know some cities are still enforcing that all-electric requirement in new construction. I'm just wondering how, what was the process that Albany decided not to enforce it? And again, if I'm getting too off base, maybe that's something we can discuss at some future meeting. Thank you.
No,
Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
no other public comment.
Yeah, I can just add, I'm not 100% sure what the purpose of the gem is. It's not the most recent parking vehicle we've purchased. It may not be a parking related vehicle, but it's a smaller kind of drive around town kind of vehicle. So I'd have to double check what exactly it does. And yes, it is a level 2 charger that was installed in Public Works. In terms of the specifics related to the green building and electrification, that might be a little bit too far off base to get into all the weeds there. But I can just say that, yeah, it was a decision made internally, talking to the legal team about enforcement and the way that the laws were interpreted. So.
All right, thank you. We'll move to discussion of this item 5.1.
I just have general comments that when the voters approved the general tax rather than specific tax, I believe that was set up to people running the Measure DD funds, if I'm correct on this one, correct me if I'm wrong, because it would pass more easily as a general rather than specific tax. And it's just important for us in the committee and for general public to make sure that we're actually spending that money and that's aligned to the Measure DD funds. I think it sounds like what's up for debate is does staff time or is it only program specific things, like what counts as Measure DD funds in terms of like if we wanted to add different programs or expand programs. I personally think that we should be spending the additional tax people are paying on marginally new programs because that adds additional marginal benefit. And as valuable as staff time is, I think it's really important that should come from the general fund itself and not from a tax on the voters.
Yeah, I just want to appreciate you for highlighting that, because that's exactly what I was kind of chewing over in my mind as well, is that like the source of the funding for community development is, of course, all city revenues. It's not a certain percentage from Measure DD tax, and there is sort of an implied mandate with Measure DD that we'll be ticking off new projects. So the whole thing is uncomfortably squishy for me. But for what it's worth, I agree that I think conceptually I think of that as a potential budget for new climate programs or expanding existing climate programs. That said, it's like super enlightening to know what percentage of the whole budget is staff time. And to think about that when we say, oh, we're just proposing this thing that costs $1,000. It's like, well, someone has to run that thing. Other comments? I want to just appreciate what Lucinda said, and we have a member from ACAC here in the room as well. Like, it, as much as, yes, the people on the committee were pushing for EVs, the people pushing for EVs were definitely all the people who called in from ACAC and who also take the time, all the time, to call city council. And we really are very appreciative. Not seeing any other comments on 5.1. All right. Then with that, let's go to item 5.2. We're going to talk about the heat pump rebate program and potential updates to it.
Okay, one moment. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm just going to give an overview here. I'll just start out by saying that this is something that's sort of a collaboration between myself and the subcommittee, the heat pump rebate subcommittee. So some of it is more of the kind of technical background and analysis of the program that I've done, and part of it is the kind of proposals for potential changes from the subcommittee, and also questions to the full committee about different options that this could take. I'll let the subcommittee share their thoughts once I'm kind of done going through all of this. But I think if the committee had a really strong opinion about changes to the program, in theory, you could make a recommendation tonight. Although it could also be something that takes a little bit more discussion, and the subcommittee brings it back and kind of come up with something a little bit more fully baked to then send along. So just a little bit of context there. Background, I think most of the committee members are familiar with this, but maybe not some of our newer ones. So this is a program that was created back in March of 2022, offering rebates for heat pump HVAC installations. And it was created with $40,000 in funding initially, and launched in June of 2022. So it's been running for almost 3 years now. We added an additional $65,000 of funding in February of 2023, and then also created a different structure. So originally it just had a sort of standard rebate and a low-income rebate, and we created a moderate income level in between there. And then in February of 2024, appropriate another $75,000 in funding, and then increased the low and moderate income levels to make it a little bit more of an equity-focused program. So that's sort of the history of the program. This is where it stands right now. I won't read all the numbers out, but standard, moderate, and low income levels. We have different levels for ducted versus ductless heat pumps, because ductless installations are usually less expensive. And then also a bonus for an electrical panel upgrade if it's going along with a heat pump project. Eligibility is very broad. Any building in Albany, and that includes multifamily or commercial buildings as well, just one rebate per housing unit. They can use any contractor. There's no like sign up or list or anything, as long as they get a building permit and as long as they apply for the rebate within 4 months of receiving their permit. So fairly simple program, which we did on purpose. And it's been very successful so far. We've given many rebates, and it seems like it's made a lot of impact for people. That said, there has been a shift in the 3 years that it's been running, and some of the conditions have changed since we originally designed it. One of the big changes is that heat pump HVAC systems have become way, way more popular in the last few years. Last year, they made up 75% of all of our HVAC permits that we gave out. So there's really been a major shift, and now it's sort of the default option. It's not something everyone's doing, but it's more common than putting in a new furnace, which is a pretty big deal. And as amazing as that is, it also means that our rebate is now less impactful than it used to be, right? Because more people are kind of already doing it, and so our measly $1,000 rebate doesn't mean as much for some people. And one way that we're really starting to see that is that fewer and fewer people that are installing, percentage-wise, that are installing heat pumps are actually applying for the rebate. So, back when we first started that first year, about 50% of installations were getting rebates. And mind you, that was still when knowledge of the program wasn't that high. Now more and more people know about it, but only 40% of people who are installing heat pumps are applying for a rebate. So it seems like there's more and more people that just don't really want to bother applying. Maybe it's not making that big of a difference to them, or maybe they feel like they don't really need it. Maybe they don't know anything about the rebate program because they learned about heat pumps somewhere else, and it's just not impacting them. So it does seem like there's a sort of shift happening there. On the flip side, heat pump water heaters, they are getting more popular, but they're definitely lagging behind. Last year, in contrast to the 75% that were heat pump HVAC systems, only 42% of water heater permits were for heat pump water heaters. And I'll add that a lot of water heaters are not permitted compared to HVAC systems. It's much lower. My guess is that probably about 10 to 20% of water heaters being installed are heat pumps. Probably 80 or 90% of those are gas water heaters, and a lot of them are unpermitted gas water heaters. So we're definitely lagging behind in the water heater category. And, interesting fact, water heaters seem to be much more sensitive to rebates than HVAC systems do. Probably, I'm guessing, because the incremental cost is much lower, and so getting a rebate can pretty quickly make a heat pump water heater cheaper than a gas water heater. So we're kind of seeing that there's a difference there. I'll walk you through this graph to kind of show that. So this, I know, is like the most terrifying, confusing graph anyone has ever seen. I apologize. But what we're looking at here is the two lines. The blue is HVAC installations. Again, this is of our permits. What percent of our HVAC permits were heat pumps? And orange is what percent of our water heater permits were heat pump water heaters, right? And that's going over time. And then, sorry? Yeah, so the blue line shows what percentage of HVAC permits were for heat pump HVACs. And the orange line shows what percentage of water heater permits were for heat pump water heaters. All right, so you can see that, the blue line's inching up. It's going closer to 100%, more and more people installing heat pump HVAC systems. And then these bars that we have are different rebate programs and kind of what periods of time they were in place. So the top one there, the kind of grayish one, is the BayREN program. I know all the colors on this are a little messed up, so it's a little bit hard to see, but that one farthest to the left is a BayREN program, which was in place for 2022 and most of 2023 and then ended. The tech program has kind of gone in spurts. That's the yellow lines. The HERA program launched at the end of 2024 and ran out of money pretty quickly. And then the blue line at the bottom is our Albany rebate program, right? So kind of gives you a sense here. We've had a relatively steady climb in heat pump HVAC's popularity. I think there's a certain degree of seasonality to it because you can kind of see this like up and down going. The summers have higher installation rates, I think, because heat pumps have AC. Huh. And then, also in the winter time, we kept shifting the program and offering more money for lower income folks and moderate income folks and stuff. So I think there's some effect of that shown in here too, and sort of a general increase over time. When you look at the orange line, the water heaters, you see these like insane spikes and valleys, and they're pretty closely linked to these incentive programs, right? There's this really, really big spike early 2024 with the tech program, and then there's this big drop as soon as the tech program ends, and then tech and HERA come back, and the numbers start going up again. So, it's small numbers we're looking at. It's hard to say with certainty, but it does seem like there's more of an impact from incentives on water heaters. And based on the incremental costs we're talking about, it's like $1,000 or $2,000, it seems like it's making more of an impact. And so because of all of these reasons, the subcommittee, and I believe the committee in an earlier discussion, felt like there was a real a shift in priority to start looking at heat pump water heaters for incentives. So that's what I'm going to talk about now is the proposed changes to the program, in particular for water heater rebates. So as you can see, this is still not super firm, kind of coming up with a rough idea of what the program could look like, but the subcommittee kind of want to talk about it as a full group. So the idea is to create a rebate for heat pump water heaters that follows the same standard moderate low income structure that we already have, and with these rough amounts. So somewhere between $500 and $1,000 for a standard rebate, $1,000 to $1,500 for moderate income, and then $2,000 to $4,000 for low income. This is based on an incremental cost of probably about $2,000 for heat pump versus gas water heater. Based on our permit data, it's about $1,000, but more accurate data probably shows it's closer to $2,000 when you take into account those that aren't getting permits. And of course, there are plenty of cases, this is just an average, right? So there's going to be plenty of cases where a heat pump water heater costs $4,000 or $5,000, $7,000 more than a gas water heater. In some cases where it'll be the same price. So based on that, the subcommittee came up with these rough numbers. And depending on where on the spectrum we fall, we estimated that the total cost for a year of rebates would be between $20,000 and $40,000 roughly. So that's the first big change. Another change, this one's maybe less proposed and more of a question mark change, is what to do about the ducted HVAC rebates that we have in place. Subcommittee recommended keeping them the same for moderate and low income, so $3,000 and $6,000 respectively. But for the standard rebate, we really had a discussion about whether we should end that rebate or lower it. That's the one that's, it's impactful for some people for sure, but it's having less and less of an impact as time goes on. And it seems like it's now a lower priority than these water heater rebates. For context, we're estimating that'll cost about $30,000 per year, roughly, which is kind of right in the middle of what those water heater rebates were going to cost. So you could kind of switch them out and have the total program budget stay about the same.
The 30,000
is for the standard rebate.
standard part.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just for standard. Yeah. So that's a question to consider. Another question is what to do about the ductless HVAC rebates. So right now we have lower rebates for ductless. You can see on the right here, 500, 1,000, and 1,500. And the reason those numbers are lower is because the incremental cost of a ductless heat pump versus a ductless furnace is smaller. It's about $3,000. Not as big of a difference. These are sort of like they go straight out, connect through the wall basically, and suck in air from the outside without, all of the duct work. So they're simpler systems. But one thing that I've noticed in the last year or two is that you're starting to see more and more people installing several ductless units in a house. So maybe they have 2 or 3 of these things installed. And it's a way of reducing the overall cost of the project and making it easier to put a heat pump in if your house maybe isn't really built for a ducted heat pump. And that's a really good approach, but it also drives up the price of the project, as you would imagine. It comes out to around $7,500 per unit that you're putting in the house. And so, I've been thinking about, do we want to change our incentive to sort of cater to that project where they're not a ducted project, but they're also not this super cheap one little unit installation that we've kind of designed it around. The problem there is that you start getting into really complicated math, and you don't want to make the program too complex, right? So again, a sort of question mark here, but maybe it's a 1.5 times rebate for 2 ductless units and a double rebate for 3 units, or maybe you have some amount that you get per unit, like $250, whatever it might be, up to a maximum, or something like that. There's lots of different ways you could arrange it, but is it worth creating some sort of slightly more complex incentive to cater to this group that is small but seems to be growing.
You said that houses that have weird ducts or whatever are doing this. Is this also multifamily?
Yes, this could definitely be something for multifamily. There are quite a few older multifamily buildings that have ductless furnaces right now, or like resistance electric heaters that are ductless. And so for a lot of like smaller apartment buildings, it could make sense to install a ductless unit for each apartment. Yeah. I will say, based on the way that we've built the program right now, in that case, each apartment unit would be eligible for its own rebate. So, just for context. Yeah, so those are kind of things to consider. In terms of budget, so in the past, you know, if you add all that up, council has appropriated $180,000 for the program over the course of 3 years. And like we talked about, it's sort of tagged as Measure DD. Again, it's coming from the general fund and by way of the department budget. So that's sort of how the money is actually flowing. And like I also mentioned earlier, our biennial budget includes about $60,000 a year for the rebate program within the department budget. That isn't a line item. It's not like rebate program, $60,000. It's kind of what we expect and sort of how we did the math when we're putting all the pieces together. But there's a certain amount of wiggle room in there. If, for instance, we're able to complete some projects under budget, there might be extra money to spend on rebates. Or if costs go way up and there's, you know, a lot of economic problems and we don't have enough money for really, really critical services, we might have to cut back on some of the rebate funding. So, you know, it's not a super solid budget item, but based on what we've kind of built out, that's what we're sort of setting aside and expecting to spend on this program. So with that in mind, you know, if the committee wanted to change the program in a way that could potentially cost $100,000 a year, that money, it's not there right now, right? It's something that, in theory, we could spend if we have the money in the department, or in theory, the committee could ask council to appropriate additional money to the department for the purpose of this program expanding. Like I said, the budget is balanced now, and that took some effort, so there's not a ton of money floating around, but that's what would have to be done in order to grow the program in that way. I'll also add that, you know, all the estimates are based on how many people we think will both install heat pumps and apply for the rebate, which are more guesstimates than estimates, but kind of gives a sense of what scale the program can manage, and sort of keeping up with the growth that we're hoping to see in the popularity of heat pumps. So hopefully that all made enough sense. I'll turn it over quickly to the subcommittee members if they have anything to add or any thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just kind of summarize the two of the kind of policy decisions we were thinking through while going through this was our priorities of one around equity, like maintaining options for low and middle income to make sure they're not left behind here, and then two, just using the money as effectively as possible for climate action. And I think Michelle laid out really well where we think for the water heaters there's, you know, evidence that it has a bigger kind of lever to pull here for Albany. That's kind of the two ways we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I would recommend that we seek to maintain or grow the program personally in terms of like how we think about this, because we know that rebates do get awareness. There is the declining people percentage getting the HVAC rebates, but I do think HVAC is important because it's the number one source of emissions in the home. And as the climate gets warmer, having AC in homes is even more important. And thinking about the impact of federal tariffs on supply costs and the supply chain and how much things cost. And having rebates continue, even for standard level, could be meaningful for people who are facing higher costs of everything. So the water heater piece, though, I think it's important to add and potentially get more budget for that, because we are seeing that people respond to incentives, this is economics 101, and that because a lot of P-pump water heaters, you have to plan ahead for them sometimes because of the panel upgrade you might need special wiring. When you don't have hot water for showers, people are really unhappy about it. So having a rebate raises awareness for people to think about planning ahead, and then that means that they're more likely to maybe preemptively replace that rather than upon failure of the previous appliance, which point I think almost all, 70 or 90%, you can look at the exact numbers, but the vast majority of water heaters are only replaced on the failure. So having people have more awareness and think about planning ahead is really good for climate and good for people's comfort.
Thanks, guys. Any questions?
Did the subcommittee have a recommendation on the ductless rebate? I think you showed some open questions, but did you have a recommendation?
We didn't come to a firm conclusion. Have you guys come to a recommendation since?
I think my general instinct is keep it simple. Just having to do a lot of math just makes people will not want to use it.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in the same. I like the idea of having some type of ability to get more if you install more, but yeah, as simple as we can keep the math, and probably maxed out to be about equal to the ducted type, I think is the direction I'd like to go.
Is there any guess on percentage of ductless versus ducted? I mean, is that if you just left it the way it is, would that just deplete the, or is it such a small percentage that it's not going to make a difference?
Ducted is a fairly small percentage. I have the number, which I can try to pull up in a
Ducted
minute.
or ductless?
Ductless is a small percentage.
Okay, that's what I would have guessed. Yeah.
Yeah, I could find the exact number. It's somewhere between 10 and 20%, I think.
I will add that one of Albany's strengths here as a rebate program is the extreme simplicity. Having applied for multiple rebates myself, Golden State water heaters, Tech Clean California, IRS tax credits, Albany's rebates, I've done a bunch of these myself. It is the easiest form to fill out, and I really like that because there's so many harder programs out there that make it more difficult to get the money, and this is the simplest of all the ones that I've used. And I think keeping it simple and helps people use it.
I was thinking keep it simple is a great approach, unless it's the 90% that's
Right.
going to deplete the program in a week or something. So that's good information. So yeah.
I have a question about last year's expenditures on this. So I'm hearing that, right now there's 60K budgeted, and if you look at the last 3 years cumulatively and average them out, we spent 60K, so it's keeping that funding static. Last year we spent 75K. Did that represent an increase in demand? And then the other question is, did anyone want a rebate that didn't get one?
Good question. So no, nobody wanted one and didn't get one.
Okay.
I'd say the main shift that happened was when the HERA rebates launched, which had quite a bit of funding for lower income folks, there was kind of a rush of low income applications for our rebate program, which of course are $6,000. So there was probably 25,000 just in that little pool in a couple of weeks. So sort of unusual spike in demand. We do hope that there's a round 2 of HERA rebates, which would hopefully lead to another spike, but I'm not super confident that that'll happen.
I guess I'm wondering, kind of along those lines, since we don't 100% know what will happen with state and federal funding. Would it be feasible to do just like a half-year check-in on the 60,000 bucket and how we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, like I said, because like there's some difficulty in the fact that the budget is a little bit squishy, but there's also flexibility there where, that could allow us to shift things around if we're seeing more space or less space than maybe we expected. Yeah, so it's something that we could, push some decisions later down the line, depending on how things go.
I think, one thing we talked about too was how this has been a very steady program compared to all the other ones. So I do think it's important we but plan this right for it to be sustainable, so there's not this boom bust. And, Albany can be the rock while California and federal programs go up and down.
Simple and steady.
Any other questions? We'll move on to public comment on item 5.2.
Any comments in the room? Okay, comments online?
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, the discussion. I had a few comments. First of all, I do agree that we should continue with the HVAC program for a couple of reasons. I mean, I think it may make sense to discontinue the standard rebate and just focus on the moderate income and the low income, especially since Michelle is telling us that a lot of the $1,000 rebates, people who are not moderate or low income don't seem to be taking advantage of, probably because they're anticipating that the rebate application is a real pain, and most of them are. However, I will say Albany's is really easy, and I mean unusually easy compared to the various other rebates. And also, at least my experience was it was received in about 2 weeks, which is really incredible since it's taking months and months to get many of the other rebates that are available. I mean, another reason I think we should keep the HVAC, and I don't know the percentages, maybe Michelle can remind me, that I do recall that that gas furnaces are a greater source of greenhouse gas emissions than hot water heaters. So if we had to do one or the other, it seems like we should continue with the furnaces. But I'm hoping we can do both, and maybe we need to cut out the standard for the HVACs in order to fund or increase the funding for the hot water heaters. I do, Michelle, you had indicated there was about a $3,000 discrepancy between gas, hot water, and heat pump hot water. My experience, and I know you said there are exceptions, but my experience in both personal experience and also talking to a lot of people about this issue, is a much bigger discrepancy. And more like, I know my mother-in-law, we got an estimate was $3,000 for a gas versus it was about $8,500, $9,000 for a heat pump. And I'm seeing those kind of numbers more often. I also agree with Catherine that these rebates, they also raise awareness and they promote the HVACs. And I think maybe a lot of the reasons that HVACs have been so much more popular or gaining in popularity is because of, the HERO rebate was just the HVAC. And a lot of people were waiting for many, many months for that to come out, knowing that the heat pump HVAC is coming out. And that's it. Thank you.
No other public comment?
All right. Thank you, commenters. We'll move to discussion of item 5.2.
Do a bio break first and then come back?
Yeah, that's
Discuss?
fine. I was going to ask after this item, but we can ask now. Is that all right with everyone? 5-minute break? All right. It is 8:10. Taking a 5-minute break until 8:15. It is 8:17. We're in discussion of item 5.2, heat pump water heaters and HVAC.
Well, I'll start. I had a couple thoughts. First off, thanks very much for the analysis because, in a way, I think it's really good news that there's less, more HVAC installations without rebates. That's great because that means that the point of the rebate is to get awareness and to get adoption. And so then people start doing the right thing on their own, which is awesome. So that's great. That's great. Really good news. And also, I always think of rebates as you're using public funds for incentivizing specific people. So, certain small percentage of individuals are benefiting for the greater purpose of adoption. So so I'm glad you're weighing this of like when's the right time to increase or decrease, so there's great analysis. I really appreciate that, and I wholeheartedly support the subcommittee's recommendations that standard, ramping that down or eliminating it because those people are clearly adopting on their own, or at least data seems to say that. And we can all guess at the psychological issues that go on with with water heaters, but having gone through it myself, when it breaks, it's an emergency, and you don't have a lot of time to think. And so if you have a higher rebate, it makes you think and plan ahead and research a little bit more because you're like, oh, that's something I might want to take advantage of. So I really appreciate the analysis, and I definitely, it feels like I would support, ramping down the HVAC part, even though it's like somebody pointed out, it's the bigger carbon emission part. So we don't want to eliminate it. We want to keep building that. They're also the ones that are the less frequently replaced. I mean, a furnace lasts 30 years or something. So where a water heater's like 10 or 15. So getting those sockets installed with an electric is great. So that's something that's going to be an annuity for a long time. So. But I thought it was interesting, the water heater part of it, because it's definitely a trickier one. And so maybe, diverting more into that seems like a great idea to me.
I was just about to say all of that, what Eric said. I appreciate the analysis a lot. It makes it pretty clear, particularly the analysis about patterns over time. And I also concur that it feels like it's time to phase out the standard incentive because that's not really being heavily utilized and it's not really driving change, and that's the whole point. And I love the idea of moving that over to water heaters. And I think the only caveat I'd add is, I would like for everyone who is interested to be able to get a rebate. So that's why I think why I'm interested in maybe getting a half-year check-in, just in case we're getting more moving at a faster rate, in which case we would ask for more money. Other thoughts?
You hadn't heard from Davia yet.
I was going to say I really like it. One of my questions was going to be if it's possible to branch out to the water heater. So I'm glad that was covered, and I think that's a great idea.
I guess I'll start to prod with some more specific questions. I feel like I'm hearing an interest in getting rid of the standard rebate, but still a little bit of hemming and hawing about possibly just reducing it. Want to make sure I'm clear on what the thoughts are there.
I thought Eric was saying to potentially, he had an interest in potentially reducing the amount for other income brackets. Is that what you were saying?
Eliminating the standard
Yeah,
and
Eliminates.
the lower middle income.
Okay.
as is,
And that's what you were saying too, Katie?
same.
Okay, just want to make sure I was
I
understanding.
couldn't remember if the committee recommended reducing or eliminating the standard.
It's kind of a question. I mean, yeah, do you guys have thoughts on that are more firm since we last spoke?
I think I'm leaning a bit towards keeping it, but at a reduced level. I think it might, still help spur some adoption, kind of that general bucket. I think people like going after, that little adder that can make them feel like they got a deal on something.
Right. And we might have gone through the early adopters and the mid-market people, and we're getting to the laggards. So, and they need more of a push, so.
I think the opportunity cost here of is the funding that if we were to cut that and to put it towards water heaters, I'm still seeing a lot of funding available for programs from HRDD funds. I feel like we're not in a need to cut it environment. So the argument for needing to cut it is, well, it's not driving as much change as it could be. Part of keeping it is there's plenty of funding that I'm seeing available. Why don't we just keep it? So it's kind of what's the marginal value you're getting for that dollar? Can we drive more change with water heater versus HVAC rebates? Probably. Do we need to cut something because of some budget reason? I'm not seeing that. So it could kind of go either way. But if we were in a scenario where we had minimal funding and we needed to prioritize, I think it's more important to cut it entirely. But I can see an argument for cutting it because it's less important. But I'm kind of leaning towards keeping some amount because, again, cost of living is slated to go up because of the tariffs and whatnot. And I think that it still has some awareness-raising amount. And if people aren't using it, then we still have that budget somewhat available because of the squishiness of the program. So I do think we should need to have water heater rebates specifically. And then for HVAC, I can kind of go either way, but I'm not seeing, we have plenty of funding at the moment, unless you want to spend more money on other programs that are more expensive. We could talk about other ideas in other meetings. So it's kind of a question of opportunity cost.
I guess I was assuming if it's reduced or eliminated, that funds are diverted to the other part of the program, not going back into the general fund. I was kind of assuming that you take it from where it's less needed, put it to where it's more needed. That was my thought. But whether, and I like the comment about maybe reducing the standard because it's such a long-term installation that getting even those moderate or upper income people to do the HVAC would be good. I don't know. You guys have analyzed it so much more though, so I'm kind of looking to you.
I think in terms of the budget, based on the estimates we have, I think if we add water heater rebates and keep the standard like it is, we'll probably run out of money. That sort of $20,000 to $40,000 that we estimated for the water heater rebate. It depends on how many people utilize it and stuff, but I don't think there's necessarily enough in the budget right now to add the water heater and keep everything else the same. If we reduce the standard heat pump rebate, might be enough, might kind of be on the edge, hard to say. If we get rid of it, then we definitely have enough funding, I think.
When community development is presenting their budget as part of the overall budget process in the coming weeks, at this point, do you need to provide any, that level of specificity, or is it
No, so, when we go to council and there's sort of, the community development budget, it only has a few items. It's staff time and that, it's got a couple of things. So it's not in there as a $60,000 line item, but in that sort of internal list, the sort of, what we saw a few moments ago, that chart where we're kind of looking through, okay, how much do we expect to spend here? How much do we expect to spend here? That's where we're planning for it to be 60,000. So we don't have to, stick to that number based on what we've told council, but just in terms of what we're expecting to spend on everything else and how much money we have. If we get to October and we've spent a bunch of money on all these other programs, and we very much could run out of funding for the rebate program and have to turn people away.
I personally, appreciate kind of where you're going with this, Catherine, of there's notionally a bucket of climate money, that exceeds the amount that we budgeted for this substantially. So while I recognize the trade-offs, and I'm grateful for the analysis that like kind of made it simple to understand that we could eliminate the standard HVAC and use that money for water heaters, we could alternatively keep things the same. And then if our spend rate at 6 months is excessive, we could ask city council for more money. Because this is important. Like this is almost half the emissions in the city. So I think it should get almost half the attention and almost half the funding. Building electrification as a whole, which of course the federally funded project is also a big part of, but hopefully we won't have to pay for that.
Yeah, I'll say, that's definitely a doable option. I think there is a chance that the council says no.
Yeah.
Which would eat into that stability factor that we were talking about. Sure. Right. So that's something to weigh. And, in terms of the budget available, like I said, the budget is balanced. A lot of that sort of like Measure D money that we were talking, Measure DD money, it's already in the budget, right? It's not like it's floating in the ether waiting to be used up. It's in the budget on all these different climate items. There's some of it in the Climate Action Reserve Fund, most of which is currently appropriated as an in-case fund for the pilot project, the decommissioning pilot project. So, there's a chance that the council is able to move money around to put more money into the rebate program. And there's also a chance that they're not able to do that, especially as costs go up. So it's definitely doable, but it is a risk.
Just a question, subcommittee. I was just thinking about the water heater, the low volume of permits and the uncertainty of the data. Do you think, in your analysis, do you think a rebate for the water heater replacement would move the needle? Would it incentivize people to do heat pumps?
I think it would, because what we saw with the tech rebates, for example, people respond to incentives, is that when there's a rebate available for heat pump water heaters, they use it. And when it's not available, they don't. That data.
I would agree with that.
I'll just go out on a limb and say I'm in favor of eliminating the standard HVAC in order to put more money into the water heater and see if we can drive more. I mean, that's a more frequent replacement, so.
Yeah,
I'm
and
with that myself.
for what it's worth, I agree with that as well. A lot because of what Troy was saying about equity being a focus. Like, to that end, if we have successfully promoted heat pumps, then any financial support should be going to people who need it. I'm wondering how the subcommittee is feeling, if you guys are wanting to like take this back and think about it some more, or if you are wanting to try and come up with a recommendation this evening.
Feeling like I'd like at least one more go at it. Crunching some of the numbers with the reduce or eliminate options, and seeing how we can. I guess I have a clear sense now of the kind of 60K and how much wiggle room we have. So just play with some of the budget and see how it works. I think we're pretty close, though. I feel like we could come back in a month with a recommendation. How do you all feel?
Sounds good. Let's crunch some numbers.
Yeah. While we're here, I might just ask the committee to weigh in on the sort of budget range for the water heater rebates. It seems like there's broad agreement on adding those. But, we kind of came up with the potential range for what those might look like with less and more. Obviously, like Troy said, we can kind of crunch numbers and think holistically, but it might just be helpful to have just kind of a gut feeling from the other committee members about where on that range you think we might want to end up. I'll go ahead and pull that back up really quickly, just so we can look at it again.
What I'm hearing is, it sounds like, Michelle, you're hoping to not have to ask for more money because of the awkwardness of if the program funding runs out, then it's awkward for everybody, or bad.
No, I mean, not necessarily. I think, you know, there's a policy decision there, which is up to you guys and to council about whether we want to try to add more, you know, and see what happens. And maybe we run out and we launch, you know, maybe there's a few months where people can't get the rebate or something. That might be worth it. On the other hand, you know, you were all talking a moment ago about the kind of benefit of having it be this stable program where the other ones kind of start and stop. So I just think we kind of have to weigh that as we think about it. It's not necessarily that one is the right way to go, but just to kind of keep it in mind. Yeah. These are the kind of proposed amounts, the sort of ranges. Like I said, you know, I think the subcommittee can spend some more time crunching numbers and stuff, but I just think it'd be helpful to have your thoughts on what you think about these ranges before we go back and talk about it more.
This is maybe too tidy, but if we want to like piggyback on our previous thoughts on what were the right ratios between the different brackets for HVAC systems, that would lead us to 500 for a standard rebate, 3 times that amount, or 1,500 for a moderate, and double that again, or 3,000 for a low income.
Okay, that's helpful. Eric or Davia? You don't have to have opinions either. Just wanted to put it out there so we could talk about it.
Like you said, water heaters can be simpler, they can be complicated.
Yes.
I mean, if you don't have an electrical system that can handle it, all of a sudden it's a $10,000 job. So,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll add in too that the panel upgrade would apply for water heater projects as well. So that could help, but yes. Yeah.
Oh, and I wanted to add, Lucinda commented that the real costs she's seeing are maybe around like 8 to something. I can't remember what the upper figure is, but for what it's worth, that's also what I have seen recently.
It said 800 to 9,000.
To what?
800 to 9,000 was what she was seeing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen various data, and I do wonder how many of those quotes never get turned into projects, and so we don't see those ones in the permits.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's difficult to get a real sense of what the costs are, but it does seem like anecdotally the difference is higher than we see in the numbers. So, yeah. Okay, I'll stop badgering you all for thoughts now.
I think Katie's general idea of 500, 1,500, 3,000 sounds like a good start, because 1,000 seems high for a water heater for standard. So that's a starting point. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you again for all the analysis that went into this. All right. We're going to do item 5.3, which is the Tri-Transit pilot.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. There we go.
This is my first slideshow for you guys, so I want slideshow feedback at the end. All right, so we talked about Tri-Transit programs in Contra Costa County and San Mateo County last month. Michelle gave us a presentation on those. So this is just following up on that with a pilot proposal for Albany to get your thoughts on that. You can go to the next slide. All right. think you're not supposed to read slides, but I'm going to read this slide. Because our goal as a city in the CAP was to reduce our VMTs, or vehicle miles traveled, by 25%, and we are not on track. Largely possibly attributable to changes in how people got around during the pandemic and since. BART ridership is still very, very low, less than half of pre-2020. And so there really is no way to meet this climate goal that we have set without getting people back on transit. And so then the question is, like, how? And I think a lot of transit officials are asking that question, but we can also ask that question as a city and see if we can contribute. Next slide, please. All right. Most of this I just said, which is that they're doing this tri-transit program in 2 other Bay Area counties. And in those counties, which they've been doing this program for a couple of years, any commuter who does not currently use transit is given, and who applies, is given a $25 Clipper card to try transit, and they also have to agree to, at least in Contra Costa, to complete an exit survey. Do you know if they do that in San Mateo?
Not sure.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah. To learn if it's been effective. And in Contra Costa, 90% of the people who tried transit said they're now more likely to continue riding transit. So they have considered that to be a successful program, and it has gotten bigger every year for, I think, 3 years.
I think it's actually been 10.
That's a lot of years. All right, so very successful program for their county. In our county, we do not have a comparable county level program. So this is, the idea here is perhaps if we tried it small, maybe the county would see the worth in doing that. Maybe not, maybe we would just keep doing it. Next slide, please. All right, so the proposal, subject to the interest of the committee, would be to start with 40 cards at $25 each, because that makes a nice round number of $1,000. And then, of course, there is staff time, which, given the presentation we just received on how much staff time costs, would be a lot of other $1,000, like $2,500 of staff time, I don't know. And so we would fund this pilot as a city, but again, in the other counties, they use their funding, their county transportation agencies use funding from the Bay Area Air District. So it's just like our county is just using that money differently right now. Next slide, please. So then the questions for you all is, who should be eligible to participate? In the other counties, I believe it is, in both counties, I believe it's anyone who lives or works in the county. But that would pose a verification issue, trying to make sure that people would have to bring in proof of their employment, I guess, within Albany. The way it appears to be phrased in the other counties' website is it's for people who don't presently use transit. Albany is very transitable, and so we may find that there are people who do use transit, but like occasionally. So another question is, are we trying to get people to change how they commute or do any type of travel at all? And then the value to the city would hopefully be not only starting to meet our goals on reducing vehicle miles, but also getting some insights. So the questions then are, what do we want to know? Does this program work? Does it incentivize people to keep going? I'm wondering, I don't think we want to have a very long exit survey, because we want people to just participate. But it would be helpful, I think, to learn some people's reasons for and against using the transit system that we currently have and whether they have unmet needs. But we'll return to this for discussion time. Next slide, please. Okay, so in conclusion, if we were to try a pilot, it could increase transit ridership, promote transit use, because when we advertise the program, we're also just advertising the goodness of transit, decrease our VMTs and the emissions that are produced in town, and improve transportation equity because transit is a lot cheaper than having a private vehicle. That's the idea. Michelle, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add kind of what I told Katie when we were chatting about this a week or so ago, that it's sort of an interesting program in that it's very simple, right? Which is part of the beauty of it. And there's a little bit of a push and pull with how targeted you want to make it, and how simple you want to make it. And I think that especially comes into play with that question about eligibility of like, okay, do we want to really try to narrow it down to a specific group and that never use it or sometimes use transit? How do we determine that? And there's only so much you can really, really check these things out, right? It's also $25, so not expecting a bunch of people coming to try and fake their way out to get this or whatever, right? But there's kind of a balance to think through there. And then kind of similarly with this exit survey, there's a balance of like, how much do we want to try to learn, but also we got to keep it simple enough that people actually respond, and how do we try to boost that response rate without taking up too much staff time? So there's some sort of interesting questions to think through here. I'd say maybe not to get too bogged down in the weeds where, this isn't a high control program. This is kind of like it's a pilot, we're trying it out. We kind of create some parameters and try to be clever about the way we do that to get the users that we want and to get survey responses, while also realizing that we're not going to get a survey response from everyone, almost certainly, and there are going to be people that sign up that maybe don't fit our criteria, and there's not that much we can do about it. But hopefully trying to kind of find a good middle ground there. So those are just kind of my thoughts as you think through how to design it if you do want to create the program. So yeah.
Thank you. Any questions?
Are we voting on this today in terms of like do it or don't do it?
We can. If it provokes tons of discussion and uncertainty, then we don't have to.
And I'll also just add in terms of the sort of logistics, I think I mentioned to Davia's question a little while ago that the budget's small enough that we could pay for this within the CD department budget, but we'd still need to get the concept approved by council. So, yeah.
On the verification piece, do we know how the other two counties do that and how much effort that is?
I don't know. Do you know, Michelle?
I'm sorry, say that again? Sorry.
Do we know how the other two counties do the verification piece?
Oh, I don't know the specific details of like exactly what questions they ask, but my guess is that it's kind of similar to what we were imagining. They have some sort of question like, do you use transit? And if you say no, then you get through and you put in your contact info or whatever. And I don't think that they're like checking that in any sort of real way.
I had a question about the eligibility part of it, because on the attachment it said that it could be open to people who work here and go to school here, and I saw that the part about working here was covered. And I was wondering, what about the part that if you go to school here? Does that make
It's a really good question, yeah, because they're, would you bring a class schedule, a report card? Any kind of district communication? I think we get like report cards in the mail.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into that kind of simplicity
Yeah.
versus whatever question. I think it makes sense to open it up to students who go to school here. And whether we want to check that or how we want to check that is a separate question. And the same with working here. Like, you know, it's a little bit more complicated than just giving us your Albany address. But it's not impossible. Again, I think any of these things, you know, someone could easily fake any of these things if they wanted to. It's also a $25 Clipper card. So I'm not like that worried about it. So.
Yeah, I guess by that token, if people were to apply online, they'd probably just take a picture of that document.
We're not in discussion yet, are we? No questions?
Not yet, yeah.
But if there's no more questions, we can move to public comment.
Looks like no public comment at this time. Never mind. Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you, Katie, for the presentation, and I think this is something that we should definitely explore and as a possible way to achieve a reduction in vehicle miles traveled, which we are not doing very well on right now. So I'm hoping that we'll explore this further. I'm not real concerned about, or I don't think it's worth the city spending resources trying to verify, you know, doing much verification. You know, there are other programs that they just ask people a question, and for the most part, you rely on their comments or their statements. And, you know, the worst thing is that you have somebody who uses transit already that gets a $25 free call more. So not that big a loss. I did want to just throw out another thing that we had talked about previously. I don't want to get too off track. Another way to reduce the vehicle miles traveled was to promote e-bikes, and there was some discussion at some point about looking at e-bike rebates. So I hope that's maybe still on the committee's radar as well. Thank you.
No other public comment.
Thank you, commenter. All right, discussion of item 5.3.
I was just going to start by saying I love the idea and want to absolutely promote transit. And a pilot is a great way to gain information and to see what we can do as far as changing behavior. I didn't see a real clear goal in this about what exact behavior we're trying to change and how this is going to do that. If I understood that there's 40, the budget would be for 40 of these transit cards.
Yeah.
And so I would be really worried about just not having a really clear definition of what we're trying to measure and who we're going to get these to in order to achieve that. Because if you only do 40 and half of them go to people who are already commuting already and you get no information, then it's like $500 that we just, just tossed out there. So I'm not that, it's a low budget, so that's great, but I just would want to see a little bit more definition about what it is we want to learn and how we're going to achieve that with this pilot. Because pilots are a great way to get that information, but we definitely want to have a little tighter, I'd want to see a little tighter proposal of what this is and how we're going to measure it. Because there's commuting out of town, there's people commuting in here, there's people working here, there's last mile traveled when you're shopping or whatever. There's all kinds of different things we could measure. So.
Yes. I'm wondering if, when you looked at the Contra Costa program, if you received any info about what they ask in their exit survey?
No, I didn't get a copy of the survey. The only data that they gave me was more or less likely to use transit, which is the one we talked about. Yeah. I will note, just kind of in the context of your point there, Eric, I think there's a good question there about sort of, do we make this a really broad program that pretty much anyone can apply for, or do we try to narrow it down? And, in theory, we could do something where, we try to do a pilot with a really specific population or group of populations. Maybe we go to the high school and we're looking specifically for high schoolers that currently drive, or, we talk to a couple of larger employers in the city, or work through one of our other, city programs for, some specific group. Maybe it's more targeted to a specific population, so we don't really need to verify because we came to them, and maybe it's a little easier to measure that way. The downside of that would be that it's a bit more targeted in a group, and then there are people that are missing out and they're not given the opportunity to participate even if they'd really like to. So, but that's maybe a thought about that again, that kind of balancing issue that you brought up.
Yeah, just guessing at this, I think people who work in Albany are our constituency. Like, people come from El Sobrante or they're further out driving out here, and people who are otherwise driving everywhere, it's convenience factors, and we're from home, haven't maybe commuted in transit in a while because of the pandemic, or because they have other reasons to, but otherwise have the income to have a car and like having a car. So do you change people's behaviors who are more low income, who are more high income? High income folks emit more emissions because they drive more and they fly more, that kind of thing. So maybe it's more impactful, but it's more justice focused to have people maybe who work here who are nannies or cooks or gardeners or whoever does a lot of Albany work in restaurants, whatever they're working in, having transit as something that supports them. I think we probably should prioritize the folks who work here. I'm not clear on the going to school here piece. Don't people have to live in Albany to go to school in Albany? Maybe I'm not clear on that one, but.
There's at the middle and high schools, there are a number of students who commute from outside of Albany.
Cool. Got it.
And some at elementary.
Yeah, so I would probably prioritize people who work here and go to school here over the higher income folks, even though it's not necessarily a emissions-based piece, because people who want to drive somewhere will drive somewhere to some degree. But people, when you're forming new habits as an 18-year-old, do you drive or take transit? So it's a key formative period when you're trying to figure out parenting behavior, as well as for folks who maybe who might want to skip driving because it's of the cost of gas or whatever, but they haven't had the incentive to try a new route yet. That can make a difference on the margin as well. So that's how I think about it.
On the piece about having a goal, what I assume to be the goal of the Contra Costa program was to sort of raise awareness, because I think, having grown up in Contra Costa, some people aren't even aware of the transit options, and to provide the nudge required for people to change their habits. And that's pretty broad. That's not specific to a certain demographic. And I think their conclusion was it worked to do that. It worked to raise awareness and to change people's habits. But as far as I know, they didn't do anything more specific than that, such as change students' behaviors or something like that. So yeah, I guess I would absorb that and kind of reformulate it as a question of, for a project of this scope, do we need it to do more than that, or something more specific than that?
One proposal I would like to move is that we have a $2,000 program, ED cards, 40 people get it immediately, and then they do the survey. 40 say they get it in 3 months, so that they get it later. And you can compare the groups about who gets it immediately versus later, about how their behavior changes potentially.
I'm confused.
Kind of like having a control group, but rather than saying you don't get it and you get it for two different groups, you have one person gets it now, one person gets it later. And is there a difference between the groups in the transit they signed up for the card, but didn't get it immediately. They got it 3 months later, and it's a control group. And then the treatment group gets the card immediately. Is there a difference in people who sign up for wanting to get it versus the people who, I guess they signed up anyway for it, but
Yeah.
like, is there a change? Are they just being aware of the program, does that change behavior versus having the card itself?
I like that idea. Yeah. Yeah, that would be pretty valuable information, because then you could dial down on to what extent have we raised awareness and to what extent behaviors change.
So there'd be a little bit more survey crunching if you wanted to do this, or you could just do the $1,000 program, focusing on the other budget you want to spend on, like the person that has e-bikes, like that's, have a future agenda item on that. But if you want to figure out how much does it change behavior? People signing up for a program is also behavior, and how do you tease that out from actually using the card? How much does that change people's behavior versus wanting to sign up for a program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We are almost at 9 o'clock, and I do want to make sure that we have time for, any announcements. I'm also wondering if there are subcommittee updates to budget time for.
I think zero energy transportation has a small update.
I think in that case, I would move that we extend the meeting to 9:15. Is that all right?
Second.
Okay. Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
And Chair Van Licklenhan.
Yes. And then also on that note, I'll want to wrap this item up so that there's time for all of that.
So I guess
Yeah.
to your question or your point that other like Contra Costa they kind of just did this to see if they could get more awareness. I guess I would like to see just a little bit more definition of what we're trying to learn and how we're going to get there. I would be happy to support it. It's not that much money, but as it's defined right now, I'd just be a little concerned we're not going to really learn. I don't know how
Yeah.
we're going to learn anything
Yeah.
at this point, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would it be, I guess I'm wondering, some of the possible questions to ask would be like, if you don't use transit now, why not? And there could be a bunch of options, maybe another option. And then another question could be like, what do you need that you're not receiving from transit? Which is another variation on the same question, but which might lead to some different insights. Those are all things like on some level that our transportation agencies should be asking people. But if we're trying to drive resident behavior and the behavior of people who work and go to school here, then maybe we need to know those things as well. Does that get to directionally, or would you want to know?
What I'm thinking is you're focused on this and you're thinking deeply on this, and I haven't been. So
Yeah.
if you came back in the next meeting with a little bit more of here's what I think we should do.
Yeah.
And here's what we want to learn, and here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And then we can look at that and say, yeah, I buy into that.
Yeah.
Right now it's just a little too open.
Right. So those two questions that I just mentioned, like, is that directionally do you want there to be more information that we get from people, or?
I guess I'm just the goal of what are we?
Yeah.
Is it to raise awareness? Okay, that's a fine goal. and
Yeah.
That's how we're going to achieve it. Or are we trying to get people who are driving and we want to get them into transit for commuting or for shopping or for people who work in other places?
All
kinds of
of
different
that. Unless people have more specific requests, all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that does kind of go to one of the big questions about eligibility. Do we want this to be focused on people that aren't using transit at all? Do you want it to be focused to people that aren't commuting on transit, or maybe use transit a little bit but not that much? Or is it kind of everybody? I mean, does the committee have thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was what I was hoping to learn, I think, is my own personal interest is all of the above. I'm curious if there are opinions in the room about whether we should focus more tightly than that. I heard Catherine share an opinion about that. If there are other opinions, I'd love to gather them now.
I pretty much agree with what Catherine was saying about, developing habits for teens, because me personally, I know a lot of teens and high schooler students that commute or come to school here from, other cities around here, and I think that would be really helpful, because, as teenagers, you want to save a little bit of money by your car, also, developing habits like Catherine was saying, so I think that would be a good group to focus on, but I'm a little biased, so.
I mean, I appreciate that idea as a way to focus it, because I had definitely come in thinking, like, we need to get everybody. And most of the people who were previously on BART were not commuting to school on BART, right? People use a bus, if anything. Yeah, I mean, my preference would just be to, like, ad hoc right now throw a proposal out there and see if it sticks, rather than bring it back. But if it doesn't stick, maybe I'll bring it back. So I would like to move that we recommend to the City Council that they adopt a tri-transit pilot program as described, focused on students in the district, because with only 40 cards, that is a way to get detailed information, to build good habits for people who are just starting out. And maybe it also just kind of helps. I'm always happy when we can build bridges to the school district. So that's what I would propose. I liked the A/B testing idea, and I kind of want to keep that in the back of our minds for if this program continues, because I do think we would get valuable information from that, but I'm also very sensitive to taking up staff time. So I'm hoping maybe it will be simple at first, but that does seem like valuable. So that was a very long-winded recommendation, but that captures, I think, the feedback that I heard.
I think I'm most of the way there. I think it'd just be useful for me to hear what percentage of students we think actually commute, just to make sure we're not from out of the city, to make sure we're not making this way too small.
Oh, well, that's actually another thing that we didn't resolve that was in the questions is, are we focusing on commuters or any type of travel? So there's a lot of students who drive cars and park the Monkey Route and go to the high school. Is that a commute if you're traveling within town, 2 miles in your car? I think it is.
That's true. Yeah, Clipper does work
Yeah.
for the bus too, so yeah, they could.
Yeah.
Yeah, say students who drive to school could be in Albany or outside of Albany.
Yeah. To drive to school or work, yeah.
If we're going to work, it sounds like people who work here may not be students, right?
Students who use a car is what I would propose. But I won't belabor it any longer because I do want to leave time for the other things. So that's my recommendation.
I'll second it. Let's move on.
All right.
Before you second it and we vote, the motion itself didn't actually have a dollar amount, so I just want to clarify.
Oh,
40 cards at $25 each is still what we're talking about.
Correct. Should I restate it?
That might be for the best,
Okay.
to just restate it a little bit more succinctly for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. I move that we recommend to City Council that we do a tri-transit pilot program with 40 Clipper cards, $25 each, $1,000 total, to be distributed to students who use cars for whatever transportation those students do as their primary form of transportation. That's all of it, I think. Okay.
Sure. Second.
Okay, Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Hodges?
first, so I think I like the idea, but I'm going to say no for now.
Member Larson?
I'm going to say no for now also. I think there's various different groups that we could be evaluating and just the right one. In favor of it, not this particular motion.
Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
And Chair Bill McClanahan?
Yes.
Okay. All right, motion passed. We can go ahead.
Okay, let's go to I'm sorry. Subcommittee updates from Zero Emission Transportation.
So just wanted to let the committee know that we had a meeting with Michelle, and we talked about extending the multifamily charging pilot program into another phase. There's been work that has been done by other areas. Let's see, I'm trying to find my notes. Who was it that I wrote it down?
I think it was Peninsula Clean
We're going to
Energy.
get feedback from somebody. Sorry.
I think Peninsula Clean Energy and
There
also
you go. Yeah.
some building owner outreach.
Right. And so just wanted to let the committee know that we're working on another new proposal to extend the multifamily charging that would be based on the idea of buildings that have similar requirements. And because what we've learned from previous pilots is that if you can get efficiencies of commonality, then that helps the projects move along. So we just wanted to help Michelle get support for another round of this in the capital improvement project. And so we're working on a more detailed proposal that we'll bring in a month or two. Anything? Okay.
I realize this is totally pedantic, but would that be then considered notional Measure DD spending? Probably depends.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that right now.
Yeah.
Probably, I don't know.
All right. So you'll bring that next month, right?
Maybe I'm not going to be here next month.
Okay.
But yeah, we're working on it, and we'll get on the agenda.
Cool. Great. Okay.
Did we have any other questions?
Any other questions about the subcommittee update?
Okay.
And because we're getting close to our time, I'd like to take really short public comment on this one. So a 1 minute comment if we have any comments.
Doesn't look like we have any comment.
All right, and then is there any discussion about this update? So I'm glad you guys are working on that. That could be really impactful, so.
Announcements?
Yeah, now it's announcement time. That's so weird. It's at the end.
Yeah, so we have announcements and requests for future agenda items kind of in one item here. I'll keep it short. We already heard a few announcements earlier in the evening from the public about some of the events coming up, so I won't get into those. But I will just note that we had our compost giveaway very recently. That was a big success. I heard today that we gave away 1,500 bags of compost. Yeah, and that is in addition to the many, many cubic yards that I'm constantly sending over to the compost hub. So there's a lot of compost going down in Albany. We're very pumped about
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll end there. And if anyone else has an announcement, you can give it now before we go into future agenda items. Anybody?
Arugula particularly likes your compost.
Glad to hear it.
The Alameda Native History Project has an acorn harvest coming up this summer, and it's open to all, no certificate heritage required. You can find it out at nativehistoryproject.org, and you can join the planning, join the harvesting, make some acorn flour, and it should be pretty fun. Check it out.
I recommend acorn flour pancakes. All right, future agenda item requests?
I'm interested in the CIP, capital improvement plan stuff around building electrification for the community center, particularly EV charging and induction stoves there. That's something that's planning for that in the next 5 years. It's going to be really impactful.
Yeah, I think anything pursuant to the CIP that people have, both building electrification for multifamily dwellings and potential electrification, I would like to ideally hear about that next month, because it sounds like July is the time for capital improvement plan putting together time. So it's then, or not again for 5 years. Oh, that's a lot. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like ideally, if we could even have a presentation about.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure whether they're presenting it for the first time to council in July.
Oh, okay.
I don't know exactly what the timeline is
All right.
on like how long that will take. It might be TBD.
Okay.
But yeah, we can talk about it in the agenda.
Okay,
meeting.
super.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other future agenda items?
We can open it to public comment for another.
Yeah, we can. We have a minute.
Yeah.
Anybody online have an agenda item?
Yeah.
Lucinda Young, go ahead.
I just very quickly, this is fit. I believe we have recommended this before. Speaking on behalf of ACAC, that and this might sound like a long shot, but I'm going to mention it because I think it is very important. And that is really looking at moving our climate goal dates up to better align with the new science. I just read that Austin, Texas advanced to reach 70% reduction by 2030. Go Austin. If Austin can do it, so can Albany. So we'd just like that to be considered. Thank you. Oh, yeah, hey, that's it. Okay.
No other public comment?
Thank you. All right, it's 9:15. This concludes our meeting for May. Thank you.